We barely survived the crash, but what she did at the hospital shattered me more than the accident ever could. I was born on a rainy Tuesday in 1994, according to the birth certificate, though my dad used to joke it was actually a Sunday and the hospital staff just didn't want to correct it because the printer was broken. He always had a goofy way of making things feel lighter than they were. And things were heavy from the start. My mom left when I was 9 months old. Just gone. No note. No goodbye. Dad said she packed a bag while he was at work and vanished like a ghost. When I was old enough to understand what that meant, I asked him once why she left. He just said, some people weren't built to love the way others need. He never badmouthed her. Not once. That's the kind of man my dad was, stoic, grounded, a little emotionally clumsy, but he never put poison in my mind. Even though I knew it had to hurt like hell. He worked his butt off to raise me, and I don't mean that in a Hallmark card way. My dad was a mechanic by trade. Dirty fingernails, oil-stained jeans, the whole thing. We lived in a 2-bedroom rental with windows that whistled when the wind blew and a fridge that leaked from the back. He used to bring me to work sometimes when daycare fell through, and I'd sit in the corner of the garage with a matchbox car in each hand pretending I was a pit crew while he rebuilt engines like a surgeon. We didn't have much, but what we did have felt solid. Dad always said, we may not have a lot of money, but we've got integrity, and that can't be bought. I repeated that to myself more times than I can count over the years, especially when I saw other kids with iPads or Jordans or fancy vacations. What we had wasn't flashy, but it was real. That mattered. I didn't even know what my mom looked like until I was 13. That's when curiosity got the better of me, and I snuck into the closet and dug out an old shoe box Dad had tucked way up high behind his winter boots. Inside were a few faded photos, most of them of him holding me as a baby, and one of a woman in a blue sundress sitting on the hood of a car, my mom. She was beautiful, I'll admit that. Like, movie star beautiful. Long black hair, cheekbones for days, a smile that looked like she knew exactly how to use it to get her way. There were no wedding photos. No baby pictures of all three of us together. Just fragments. I didn't confront Dad about it. I wasn't ready, and I think a part of me knew he didn't keep that box out for a reason. So I kept that knowledge to myself, and over the years, I tried to stop wondering why she left. Or if she'd ever come back. Fast forward a decade, Dad finally started catching some serious success. After years of working for other people, saving pennies, and watching his buddies flame out or go broke, he took a gamble and opened his own repair shop. Randy's Auto, big red sign out front, and suddenly everything changed. The garage was always full. He hired 2 guys, then 4. Bought a new truck. Finally fixed the damn leak in the fridge. We moved into a modest 2-story house in a decent suburb with real grass and a mailbox that didn't lean. It wasn't a mansion, but for us, it felt like we'd made it. Then, like clockwork, she showed up. It was a Saturday morning, maybe a year after we moved in. I was 22 by then and helping Dad with the books at the shop. I pulled into the driveway with coffee and donuts, and there she was, standing at the front door like she belonged there. My mom. I recognized her instantly, even though 15 years had passed since I saw that photo. Same hair, just shorter. Same cheekbones, same smile, though this time, it looked nervous. Maybe even calculated. She was holding a gift bag. I just stood there for a second, stunned, not even sure if I should go inside or reverse out of the driveway like I'd just seen a ghost. Then she saw me, smiled like we were long-lost friends, and said, "You must be Evan." I didn't respond. I walked past her, unlocked the door, and went inside. Dad was at the kitchen table. He looked up, saw me, and then her. His face didn't change. He just stood up slowly, like someone who'd been expecting this day for years but still didn't know how to handle it. "Hey, Randy," she said softly, like they'd broken up last week and not over 2 decades ago. Dad didn't yell. Didn't cry. Just looked at her, then at me, and said, "Let's sit down." I'll never forget that conversation. She claimed she'd been through a rough patch. Said she regretted everything. Claimed she'd tried to reach out years ago but didn't have the means. She had tears in her eyes, but I've seen better acting on reality shows. I just sat there with my arms folded, looking back and forth between the woman who left and the man who never did. Dad didn't say much, just nodded slowly, said it was a lot to process. She left after about 20 minutes, and I swear the air felt cleaner when she was gone. I turned to him and asked, "You okay?" He just let out a breath and said, "I knew it was a matter of time. I just didn't think it'd feel this weird." After that, she started rebuilding bridges, as she called it. She showed up every few weeks with banana bread or framed pictures of me as a baby I'd never seen before. She brought books and birthday cards and once even offered to help organize the garage, which Dad politely declined. And to be honest, for a while I started to believe maybe she'd really changed. I didn't trust her fully, but I watched Dad slowly soften. He never said he forgave her, but he let her in. Inch by inch, week by week, she worked her way back into his life like ivy creeping up an old wall. When she brought a man around a few months later, I was skeptical. His name was Vic. A little too tan, too smooth, with the kind of handshake that screamed sales guy. He was younger than her by maybe 10 years and called my dad buddy way too often. Vic wasn't awful, just off. He never looked anyone in the eye for long and always seemed like he was scoping something out. When they announced they were getting married, I felt the first real ripple of dread. Dad didn't say much about it. He just said, she's her own person. She can make her choices. But I could tell he didn't like it. He'd never remarried himself. Always said he was too busy raising me to think about love again. Now here she was, floating back into our lives like a returning queen, bringing a stranger along for the ride. I wish I could say that's where the story slows down, that we found some weird version of peace. But that would be a lie. Because not long after their engagement, everything spiraled. Fast. And then Dad died. It wasn't some long, drawn-out illness. It was a heart attack in his sleep. He didn't even make it to the hospital. One night, he went to bed talking about how the carburetor rebuild on a client's Mustang was gonna be tricky, and the next morning I found him cold and gone. Just like that. That morning is scorched into my memory. The ambulance lights. The cops. The coroner. The look on my mom's face when she got there, less grief, more performance. Vic stood behind her, hand on her shoulder like he was already rehearsing for a role he hadn't earned. They cried for the right amount of time. Said the right things. Then moved on to planning. That's when things got really ugly. After the funeral, everything felt like static. People I hadn't seen in years were suddenly hugging me, squeezing my arm, telling me how proud my dad had been of me. But none of it registered. I kept thinking about how quiet the house felt without his laugh bouncing off the walls or the smell of motor oil clinging to his jacket hanging by the door. He was gone. Just gone. Mom, no, Lee. I stopped calling her Mom the day I found out she walked out on me as a baby. She tried to wedge herself into the center of it all. Suddenly, she was the grieving widow, despite having been gone for over 20 years and back for less than 2. She cried at the service. Wore all black. Dabbed her eyes with tissues every time someone looked in her direction. Vic stood beside her like a backup singer, wearing sunglasses and smirking like he was trying to suppress a joke. I stood alone by the casket and didn't say a word to either of them. After the burial, I expected them to disappear back into whatever shallow life they'd crawled out of. But Lee had other plans. 2 days after we laid Dad to rest, I came home from the shop to find the garage door open. At first, I didn't think much of it, maybe I'd forgotten to close it, but then I saw the trash bins lined up in the driveway, all overflowing. Cardboard boxes, plastic containers, old clothes. At first, I thought it was just junk. Maybe they were doing some spring cleaning. But then I saw one of Dad's old army jackets stuffed into a torn black trash bag. It still had the patch on the shoulder, the one he always wore when we worked outside in the cold. I walked into the garage, and I swear, my heart dropped to my stomach. Everything was in disarray. His tools were scattered. The old cabinet where he kept his Navy stuff was wide open and empty. A box labeled Evan's Baby Things sat on the floor half spilled. My first pair of shoes. A photo of me holding a wrench twice the size of my head. My dad's letters from the Gulf. His handwriting, which I hadn't seen in years, was crumpled next to a pile of discarded clothes. Vic came around the corner with a smug look on his face and a box in his hands. Oh hey, man. Didn't hear you come in. Just helping Lee clear out some old junk. Gotta make room, you know? I swear, I saw red. That's not junk. That's my dad's life. His stuff. Vic chuckled like I was being overdramatic. Yeah, well, it's not exactly useful now, is it? I didn't even respond. I walked over, snatched the box from his arms, and shoved it down on the workbench. Lee came in a few seconds later, wiping her hands with a dish towel. Evan, honey, we were just going through some of the old things. We figured it might be time to, you know, refresh the place a bit. Refresh? I barked. He's been dead a week, and you're tossing his entire life in the garbage. She blinked, caught off guard by my tone. We're just trying to move forward. You've always said how you hated clutter. I hated clutter, I cut her off, not memories. Vic stepped forward like he was gonna say something else, but I raised my hand. Don't. You don't get to speak right now. He backed off, but not before I caught the flash of annoyance in his eyes. Like he was offended I didn't appreciate all the work he was doing cleaning up. I spent the next 2 hours pulling everything back out of the trash bins, trying to salvage what I could. Some things were soaked or torn or broken beyond repair. That hurt more than I expected. And Lee? She just watched me. Arms crossed. Not even pretending to be sorry. I didn't think you'd be so sentimental, she finally said. No, I said. You just didn't think. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the look on Vic's face, like he was already measuring the house for his own furniture. Like he thought he belonged here now. The will reading was a few days later. I was nervous, but not because I expected anything controversial. My dad and I had talked a lot about the house, the shop, all of it. He always said, "This is yours when I'm gone. You earned it same as me." Still, when we sat down in that lawyer's office, and Lee showed up holding Vic's hand like they were on some honeymoon cruise, my stomach turned. The lawyer, a grey-haired guy named Mr. Benning, opened the folder and read out Dad's wishes. The house, the business, the vehicles, the savings, it was all mine. Sole beneficiary. The will had been updated 6 months prior. Clear as day. Lee didn't say anything at first. Just stared at the paper. Vic, however, leaned back and laughed like it was a sitcom. Well, isn't that something? Lee looked at the lawyer and said, "There must be a mistake." Benning raised an eyebrow. "This document is legally binding. There's no mistake." She tried to argue. Said they were reconnected, that they were planning to remarry, that she'd been back in his life for years. She even pulled out a wrinkled envelope that she claimed was a handwritten promise from Dad to revise the will and leave her something. Mr. Benning didn't even blink. "That's not a legal document, Miss Foster." She turned to me then. For the first time, the charm dropped from her face. She looked angry. Entitled. "You're really going to keep everything? After I came back, after we made peace?" I stared at her. "You didn't come back for peace. You came back for a payout." Vic rolled his eyes. "Come on, kid. Don't be like that. She's your mother." "No," I said, standing. She stopped being that when she walked out. "And you? You're just a leech who saw a free ride." We left the office, and I thought, maybe hoped, that would be the end of it. I was wrong. So wrong. Over the next couple weeks, Lee and Vic made themselves more present than ever. They kept showing up at the house. First under the pretense of visiting Dad's memory, then under more casual reasons. "Oh, I left a scarf here. We were thinking of using the backyard for a small gathering. Vic just wanted to check in and see if you needed help with anything." Each time, they'd linger longer. Touch things. Open drawers. Act like they still belonged. I started locking the doors every time I left the house, even if it was just for a short drive. Then one afternoon, I came home and found them in the living room. Vic had let himself in with a key. I must have forgotten to collect Dad's spare from the flower pot out front. They were measuring the dining room. Thinking about painting, Lee said casually, like it was totally normal to redecorate a house that didn't belong to them. Vic added, "The wedding's coming up, and this space would be perfect for it." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Lee smiled wide. "Oh, didn't we tell you? We're getting married. Figured it would be poetic. The place where your father and I rebuilt our lives. What better place to celebrate?" I didn't say anything. I just walked out. That night, I changed all the locks. 2 days later, an invitation arrived in the mail. An actual formal invite. White embossed cardstock with gold trim. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Lee Foster and Victor Daniels. At the Foster family residence. Saturday 2 p.m. I stared at it, stunned. Foster family residence? My house. My Dad's house. That was the moment something inside me snapped. They wanted to throw their wedding here? Fine. Let them try. I had a plan. And it was going to ruin their day in the best possible way. I stared at the wedding invitation like it was a slap across the face. Gold trim. Calligraphy. The audacity of putting my address under venue. My stomach churned with a fury I hadn't felt since the day Vic called my dad's belongings junk. For 2 weeks, I didn't speak to either of them. I didn't respond to Lee's passive-aggressive texts, "Hope you're doing okay. We're all just trying to move forward, Red Heart hash." Or Vic's smug messages, "Hey, buddy, let us know if you need help getting the place ready for the big day." Help? I was ready to torch the damn place before I let them parade around like they owned it. But I wasn't going to be reckless. No. I was going to be smart. The first thing I did was dig up the old deed, double-check the will, and talk to Mr. Bennying again. Just to be sure. Everything was still in my name, house, garage, land, all of it. No loopholes. No technicalities. That house was mine. And that meant they needed my permission to host anything there. Which, of course, they never got. What I found out later was that Lee had been going around to friends and extended family, spinning some tale about how I'd given her my blessing to host the wedding. Claimed it was my way of letting go, and starting anew as a family. The woman could sell sand in a desert. I'll give her that. They must have thought I'd be too stunned or guilt-ridden to stand in their way. Maybe they believed that deep down I still wanted a relationship with Lee. That I'd swallow my pride and let them have one day. They severely underestimated how much my dad meant to me. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I made my own preparations. First, I moved everything of value out of the house and into storage, Dad's tools, the Navy memorabilia, my own things. I rented a small storage unit down the road and packed it tight. By the end of the week, the house was basically empty aside from furniture I didn't care about and a few items I left in place on purpose. Then I changed the locks again. Deadbolt, knob, and a keyless keypad entry. Installed motion-activated cameras around the perimeter too, something I'd meant to do after the first break-in, but never got around to. Now I had more motivation than ever. Next, I blocked off all access to the backyard. Padlocked the gates. Put up no trespassing signs. Called the city and reported a private event that had not received proper permitting. It wouldn't stop them, but it was another layer of friction. I even scheduled a pest control service for the morning of their wedding and told the guy if anyone tried to cancel, it wasn't me. Yeah, I got petty. But after everything? I think I'd earned a little pettiness. And still, I didn't tell them. I wanted them to show up thinking they were walking into a fairy tale. I wanted Lee in her dress, Vic in his rented tux, the guests holding champagne flutes on the lawn. I wanted them to get all the way to the front door, only to find it locked. That Saturday, I woke up early. I wasn't nervous. I was calm. Focused. The sun was shining, not a cloud in the sky. Dad would have loved that. By noon, the neighborhood started buzzing. A few unfamiliar cars started rolling in. I parked down the street in a friend's driveway and waited with a coffee and a front row seat to the chaos. First came the decorators, 3 women with folding tables and floral arrangements. They carried things toward the house, confused to find every door locked. They circled the property once, then twice, trying to find a way in. I watched them knock, wait, look around. Then came Lee and Vic late, of course. Vic pulled up in a rented black SUV, hopped out like a celebrity, sunglasses and all. Lee followed behind in a white gown that looked like it cost more than my truck. They both stood at the front door, knocking, then pounding. Nothing. Vic pulled out his phone. I let it ring. Then again. I finally answered on the 3rd try. Evan, he said, fake cheerful. Hey, buddy, can you come open up? We've got vendors and guests arriving. I sipped my coffee. Oh, you're there already? Yeah, he said, laughter in his voice. Come on, man. Let's not do this today. We've got people waiting. I let the silence hang before replying. You do realize I never gave you permission to use the house, right? There was a pause. Then Vic laughed again, more nervous this time. Okay, come on, Lee said you were cool with it. No, I said. Lee assumed she could hijack my home. Again. Just like she hijacked Dad's death. I could hear Lee yelling in the background. Something about ruining everything. I added, by the way, I cleared the house. So unless your ceremony needs an empty couch and some broken memories, I'd start making other arrangements. Vic's tone shifted. You think this is funny? You're embarrassing your family. All these people out here, your aunts, cousins. None of my people were invited. Only the ones who believed whatever garbage Lee fed them. So yeah, Vic. I think it's hilarious. He started shouting then, swearing, demanding I open the door. I hung up. About 10 minutes later, one of the decorators started pulling on the side gate. When she saw the padlock, she called Lee over. I watched her throw her arms up and start crying. Someone else tried to open a window. I'd nailed those shut days ago. Eventually, the guests started arriving. One by one, dressed in pastels and suits, clutching gifts and squinting at the front lawn. And one by one, they realized the wedding wasn't happening. Lee started making a scene. Big, dramatic, weepy meltdown in the driveway. Vic was pacing, red in the face, clearly trying to figure out how to spin this. That's when I walked up. I wanted to see their faces in person. When Lee saw me walking down the sidewalk in jeans and a hoodie, her jaw dropped. Vic turned and charged toward me. "You piece of..." I held up my phone. I wouldn't finish that sentence. "I've got you on record trespassing." "This entire stunt?" "Illegal. Unauthorized event. Forced entry last week. Want me to keep going?" He stopped mid-stride. Lee looked wrecked. Makeup smeared, hair frizzing in the heat. "How could you do this to me?" "To you?" I repeated, astonished. "You dumped me as a baby, came back when Dad finally made something of himself, moved your leech boyfriend in, threw away the only things I had left of him after he died, and now you want to throw a wedding in his house like none of that happened." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I continued, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You didn't come back for love. You came back for money. You thought you could rewrite history. But you forgot this house? This life? My dad built it for me. And I'm not letting you tarnish his memory with some tacky backyard circus." The guests were dead silent. Someone clapped. I still don't know who, but it spread fast. A few of my dad's old co-workers, maybe. An old family friend who'd stayed neutral. Even a distant cousin who'd bought into Lee's narrative turned and walked away. Eventually, Vic grabbed Lee by the arm and they retreated to their SUV. Before they left, I called out, "If you try to sue, just know I've got footage of everything. The locks. The trashing of his belongings. The trespassing. You'll lose." They drove off in silence. No honking. No music. Just the quiet shame of a failed con. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the sunset over Dad's old shop sign in the distance. I whispered, "We did it, old man. They're gone." But I wasn't done yet. Lee had stirred up the past, and I'd only just begun to settle some old scores. The aftermath was a weird cocktail of satisfaction and exhaustion. Word about the wedding that wasn't spread through our town like wildfire. Small towns are good at two things, bad coffee and great gossip. And with Lee's dramatic history already known in pieces, her abandoning me, suddenly showing back up, the whirlwind with Vic, this only added more fuel. It wasn't just whispers, either. People talked. Openly. The next morning, I got a text from one of Dad's old friends, Hank, who used to stop by the garage every Saturday to talk about his classic Chevelle. All it said was, "Randy would be proud of you, kid." That hit me harder than I expected. But of course, peace was temporary. It always is when you're dealing with people like Lee and Vic. 2 days after the non-wedding, I got a visit from a sheriff's deputy. Friendly guy, looked almost sheepish. He handed me a manila envelope and said, "Sorry, Evan. Just the messenger." It was a demand letter. Vic and Lee were claiming emotional damages, lost deposits, public humiliation, and even, get this, property access infringement. Apparently, because Lee used to live here over 20 years ago, and had stayed for a few weeks after Dad's death, they were asserting she had some implied rights. It was laughable. I didn't even need a lawyer to tell me it was garbage. But I got one anyway. Mr. Benning referred me to a litigation attorney who specialized in estate-related disputes. I handed over the letter, the footage from my cameras, screenshots of their texts, and a printed copy of the will. My new lawyer skimmed through everything, looked up at me, and said, "This is going to be fun." The formal response we sent back was, in essence, a giant legal middle finger. We cited everything, property ownership, unauthorized entry, attempted fraudulent use of the premises, even the discarded belongings as potential theft or vandalism. The moment they realized I wasn't bluffing, the tone shifted. A week later, I got another message, but not from a lawyer. It was from Lee. "Can we please talk? Just you and me. No Vic, no drama." I stared at that text for a while. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part wanted to tear into her again. But something about the wording, "No Vic." So I said yes. 1 hour, public place, no tricks. We met at this old diner off Route 9. The kind with a broken jukebox and booths that hadn't been reupholstered since the 80s. Dad used to take me there for pancakes on weekends when the garage was slow. She was already sitting when I arrived. No makeup, no jewelry, hair pulled back. She looked older, tired, more real than I'd seen her in months. "Thanks for coming," she said. I didn't sit right away. "You alone?" She nodded. I checked the parking lot anyway. No sign of Vic. I slid into the booth, arms crossed. "Start talking." She took a deep breath. I didn't expect it to go this far. Didn't expect what? I asked. That I wouldn't roll over and let you throw a wedding in my dad's house? That I'd forget the fact you tossed out half his life without blinking? She flinched, but didn't argue. I wasn't thinking straight. Vic, he talked me into a lot of it. I raised an eyebrow. Vic talked you into pretending my house was your wedding venue? She looked down at her hands. I know it sounds bad. And I'm not blaming everything on him. I wanted a do-over. With you. With everything. I thought maybe if we created something new in that space. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. You don't get to rewrite history. Silence stretched between us. The waitress came by and poured coffee. Neither of us touched it. Finally, Lee spoke again. I made a mistake leaving back then, she said quietly. I was young. Scared. Your dad was working all the time. I felt trapped. Do you know what it was like growing up never knowing why I wasn't good enough for you? I asked, my voice shaking. To watch Dad bust his back every single day while I kept wondering if you'd ever come back? She looked like she wanted to cry, but I didn't care. You didn't just leave him, I continued. You left me. A baby. I know, she whispered. I regret it every day. Then why did you come back? Be honest. She hesitated, then said the quiet part out loud. Because I heard about the shop. About the house. About what Randy built. And I thought, maybe I could fix things. Or at least be a part of it again. Not him, I said. What he built. Not who he was. That's telling. She didn't deny it. I stood up. Dropped a 10 on the table even though we didn't order anything. You want my advice? I said. Drop the lawsuit. Cut your losses. Disappear. That's the best gift you could give me now. She didn't argue. I walked out. But of course, Vic wasn't done. He came to the shop one morning, 3 weeks later. Pulled up in a leased convertible with sunglasses on and that same smarmy grin. Thought maybe we could chat, he said, leaning on the hood of my dad's old Impala that I was restoring. I didn't answer. Just kept working. You got your little victory, he said. Congrats. You humiliated us. That's gotta feel good. I looked up. Better than you'd expect. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. But you know what I think? I think you're still just that bitter little kid who never got over mommy leaving. And now you're punishing her because you never grew up. That got my attention. I wiped my hands and stepped forward. You don't get to talk about what I went through. You were barely in the picture for a year and already tried to steal a house that wasn't yours. He smirked. You think your dad was some kind of saint? You ever wonder why she left in the first place? I blinked. What are you talking about? He leaned in closer. Maybe your precious daddy wasn't as perfect as you remember. Then he got back in his car and drove off. The thing is, those words stuck with me. I tried to brush them off, typical manipulation. But they lingered, buzzing like a mosquito in the back of my mind. What did I really know about why she left? Dad had always been so quiet about it. He never trashed her. Never explained the real story. I'd assumed it was because he wanted to protect me. But what if there was more? That night, I went to the storage unit where I'd stashed everything. I opened up a box I hadn't looked through yet, old papers, letters, bills. At the bottom was a showbox. Inside it? A stack of letters. Letters from Lee. Postmarked but unopened. Dated between 1996 and 2001. My hands trembled as I picked one up and slowly pulled out the folded paper inside. Dear Randy. I know you're still angry, but I miss Evan. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to see him. Please. Even once. Just to know he's okay. I sat down on the cold concrete floor and read them all. Dozens. Pleading. Apologizing. Asking to be part of my life. He'd kept them. But he'd never opened a single one. I thought I knew everything. But now. I wasn't so sure. The truth was messier than I realized. And I wasn't even close to done unraveling it. I don't know how long I sat there on the concrete floor of that storage unit, letters scattered around me like autumn leaves. The air was heavy, damp, like it was holding its breath alongside me. For so long, I'd held onto this clean narrative, my mom left, Dad raised me, end of story. I never dug deeper because I didn't want to risk seeing Dad in any light less than heroic. But there they were, dozens of letters, some with smudged ink, others torn at the edges, all addressed to my father. All unopened. I read every single one. She didn't just vanish and forget about us. Lee had written almost obsessively during those first few years, begging to visit, to call, to explain. She admitted to being overwhelmed, said she had postpartum depression, that she panicked. That walking out was the worst decision of her life and that she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she wanted the chance to try. And Dad? He'd never told me any of this. Not a word. It didn't erase what Lee had done. Leaving a baby behind, no matter the circumstances, isn't something you can just paper over with regret. But it shook something loose inside me. This story I built around my dad, the perfect single father, the martyr, suddenly had cracks. Had he blocked her out to protect me? Or to punish her? I sat in my truck for a long time afterward, just gripping the steering wheel and staring at the dashboard like it might give me an answer. Eventually, I drove home, my mind churning. I didn't sleep that night. I barely moved from the couch, the box of letters sitting on the coffee table like a bomb I didn't know how to defuse. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Lee. She answered on the first ring. Evan? I found the letters, I said. Silence. I didn't know he kept them. I didn't even know you wrote them. He never opened a single one. Her voice cracked. I know. I was never sure if he read them. But I kept writing. I had to. You should have told me sooner. I didn't think you'd believe me. She was right. I wouldn't have. Not a year ago. Not even a month ago. But now? Now I didn't know what to believe. We met up again. Same diner. Same cracked vinyl booth. She didn't gloat. She didn't say, I told you so. She just listened while I tried to piece together the version of my childhood I thought I understood. I'm not saying what you did was okay, I told her. You still left. You still didn't come back until Dad had something worth taking. She nodded, eyes red. I know. But it wasn't all black and white. And that's messing with me more than I expected. We sat there, two people trying to untangle a lifetime of silence. She told me things I never knew, about how young she was when they got married, how she felt trapped in suburbia while her friends chased dreams in other cities. How she thought she'd be a bad mother, and how that fear became a self-fulfilling prophecy the night she packed a bag and left. I've lived with the guilt every day, she said. I didn't come back for money. Not at first. I saw Randy on the local news. There was a feature on small businesses during COVID. And he looked older. Tired. But he was smiling. And I thought, maybe there's still time. You should have told me the truth. I was afraid it would just make things worse. I left the diner more confused than I'd been in years. But at least it felt like I had the full picture now. Messy. Imperfect. Human. Vic, however, was a different story. He was still sending texts. First threats, then guilt trips. Eventually he moved on to begging. Man, I'm sorry. We went about it all wrong. Let's talk. No lawyers. Just us. Blocked. Then he tried from another number. This time from a mutual friend's phone, pretending he was someone else. Blocked again. But he wasn't done. One night I got home to find the mailbox ripped off the post. The front gate was hanging open, and someone had keyed the side of my truck. Nothing subtle, just a deep, ugly gouge running from the driver's side door to the back panel. And carved into it, in crude block letters. Thief. I knew exactly who'd done it. I called the cops. They filed a report, reviewed the camera footage I'd wisely never taken down, and confirmed what I already suspected. Vic hat, hoodie, walking like he was trying not to look like himself, which made him look exactly like himself. The cops offered to press charges, but I said no. Instead, I took the footage to his job. Turns out Vic worked in regional sales for a real estate firm. Fancy building, nice lobby, glass doors that practically screamed, "Don't bring drama in here." I didn't go in. Just emailed the footage to their HR department with a brief note. This is how one of your senior employees behaves when he doesn't get his way. 2 days later, I heard through the grapevine he was let go. Not fired. Just encouraged to seek employment elsewhere. The real estate world is all image. They couldn't risk someone with vandalism on camera tied to their company's name. That felt good. But not as good as what came next. I got an unexpected call from Mr. Benning, the estate lawyer. Evan, I came across something interesting while finalizing your father's accounts. Do you have a minute? He told me there was a small trust in my name, one that Dad had set aside years ago but never mentioned. It was modest, around $25,000, but it came with a letter. I picked it up in person. It was handwritten, folded neatly inside an envelope with my name on the front. Evan. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. First, I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become. Strong, stubborn, smarter than I ever was. I'm sorry for all the times I couldn't say that out loud. I didn't open her letters. I couldn't. Every time I saw her handwriting, it made me feel like I'd failed you. Like I wasn't enough to keep our family together. Maybe that was selfish. I just couldn't relive it. If you ever reconnect with her, I hope it's because you wanted to. Not because you needed to. You don't owe her anything, but you deserve to have the truth. Use this money for something that makes you feel free. A trip. A truck. A new chapter. I love you. Always have. Always will. Dad. I cried reading it. Like, really cried. Ugly, messy, chest-heaving sobs that I didn't even know were in me. I clutched that letter like it was a lifeline, and in a way, it was. I hadn't lost everything. I still had my memories. My father's voice in my head. And now, a better understanding of where I came from, even if it was complicated. The next weekend, I took the truck down to the coast. Just me, the ocean, and Dad's old tool bag in the passenger seat like it always was. I sat on the hood and watched the sun dip into the water, his letter folded in my pocket. Closure isn't clean. It doesn't come with big orchestral music and perfectly timed hugs. It's slow. It's clumsy. It stings. But that day, sitting by the sea, I felt the first flicker of peace. The chaos had passed. The truth was out. And whatever came next, it was mine to write. A month passed. Maybe a little more. The silence was jarring at first, no texts, no drama, no lawyers breathing down my neck. I kept expecting the next shoe to drop. But it didn't. Lee stopped calling. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was shame. Or maybe she finally accepted that the chapter she wanted to rewrite wasn't hers to control anymore. Vic? Completely gone. Like he'd vanished off the face of the earth. I heard rumors, some mutual friend mentioned he was crashing with a cousin 2 towns over. Unemployed, still blaming me for ruining his life. Classic. I didn't care. I used the money from the trust to take a 2-week road trip up through Oregon and into Washington. I visited places Dad always talked about but never had the time to go to. A few national parks. Some weird roadside attractions. One night, I slept under the stars on the bed of my truck, wrapped in an old army blanket that still smelled faintly of his garage. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. When I got home, the house felt different. Not haunted, just quiet. I started filling it again, not with memories of what was, but with pieces of who I was becoming. Framed photos from the trip. A new couch that didn't creak. Plants, even. I couldn't believe I'd become a plant guy, but there I was, Googling how not to kill a fiddle leaf fig. For the first time, it felt like mine. Not a shrine to Dad. Not a battleground with Lee. Just a home. But the past has a funny way of circling back when you least expect it. It was a Sunday afternoon when I saw the moving van parked 2 houses down. I didn't think much of it, our neighborhood was always changing. But then I saw her. Lee. No Vic. No drama. Just her, standing in the front yard of a modest rental, talking to the landlord. I watched from the porch, trying to figure out if this was some kind of sick joke. But there was no sign of performance. No staged crying. Just cardboard boxes, a tired face, and the weight of someone who'd lost a lot. I didn't go over. Not then. But that evening, as I was taking out the trash, she looked up and saw me. We both froze. Then she gave the smallest nod. I nodded back. That was it. No words. No dramatic reunion. Just a quiet recognition. Over the next few weeks, I saw her here and there. At the grocery store. Walking around the block. Always alone. We never spoke, but we also didn't avoid each other. There was an unspoken agreement between us, we'd done enough damage. Let the dust settle. But the most surprising moment came one night when I was working late in the garage. I was tuning up the Impala, Dad's pride and joy, when I heard a soft knock on the side door. I turned and saw a kid. Maybe 10, 11 years old. Dark curly hair, oversized hoodie, gripping a tablet like it was a shield. Are you Evan? He asked. I wiped my hands and nodded. Yeah. What's up, kid? I live down the street now. My mom said you're good with cars. I raised an eyebrow. Your mom? He tilted his head back toward the rental. Lee. She's my foster mom. That stopped me cold. She's fostering? He nodded. Said she's trying to do something good. I like her. She's kinda weird, though. She sings while she cooks. I didn't know what to say. My jaw must have been halfway to the floor. She said you used to work on cars with your dad, the kid continued. I want to learn. I looked at the Impala. At the wrench in my hand. At this kid who barely came up to my shoulder, asking if he could be part of something that used to define me. All right, I said slowly. You ever used a socket wrench before? He grinned. Nope. Well, I said, tossing him one, today's your lucky day. We spent the next hour under the hood. I showed him how to check the oil, how to loosen a bolt without stripping it, how to wipe your hands on the one rag in the shop that still smells like motor grease and nostalgia. He was a fast learner. Asked a million questions. I answered what I could. When he finally left, he turned at the end of the driveway and shouted, "Thanks, Evan." I waved. Anytime. Later that night, I stood in the garage long after the lights were off. I could almost feel Dad standing next to me, nodding. I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I like to think he would have approved. The next day, Lee came to the door. First time since everything. She didn't try to come in. Didn't bring banana bread or apologies. Just stood there and said, thanks for being kind to him. He needed that. He's a good kid, I said. I like him. She nodded. I'm trying, Evan. Not to make up for the past. Just trying. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, that's all you can do. She didn't linger. Didn't push. Just turned and walked away. And that was enough. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected, forgiveness. Not for her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But for myself. For the weight I carried for years. For the anger I thought would define me forever. That was when I knew the war was truly over. The house was mine. My memories were safe. And whatever story I lived next, it would be one I chose, not one written for me. Spring came early that year. The cherry tree in our front yard, the one Dad planted back when the lawn was still mostly weeds and patches of dirt, bloomed bright pink for the first time in years. I don't know why it struck me so hard. Maybe because it felt like a sign. Like something was finally healing. Or maybe because it was the first spring in a long time where I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to live. Life settled into a rhythm. The kind that's quiet but full. I worked the shop during the week and spent weekends tinkering in the garage. The kid, his name was Miles, I found out, started stopping by more often. Sometimes he helped me with small projects. Other times he just sat on the workbench asking about cars or telling me stories about school. He was curious. Honest. Unfiltered in the way only kids can be. One day, while we were changing the spark plugs on a beat-up Civic, he asked, "Did you hate her?" I didn't even have to ask who he meant. I tightened the socket wrench and said, yeah. I did. For a long time. Why? Because she left, I said. And when she came back, it felt like she wanted to erase everything that happened in between. Like all those years didn't matter. He thought about that for a second. She told me she made mistakes. That she's trying to be better now. I nodded. She is. That doesn't mean what she did didn't hurt. But you don't hate her now? I paused. Looked at him. Then said, no. I don't. It was the first time I said it out loud. And it was true. Letting go of that anger hadn't been some grand, sweeping epiphany. It was gradual. Like turning the volume down on a radio you didn't realize had been blaring in the background your whole life. Lee never asked for forgiveness directly. And that, oddly, made it easier to find. She didn't try to explain away the past anymore. She just lived differently. Kept fostering kids. Volunteered at the community center. Got a job managing donations at the thrift store downtown. Small, quiet things that didn't scream redemption but whispered, I'm still here. I'm still trying. She never came into the house again. Not once. Even when she dropped Miles off, she'd wait at the curb. I think she knew crossing that threshold would never be hers to do again. That space belonged to the man who raised me and the life we built without her. But somehow, without either of us saying it, we found a kind of truce. Not mother and son. Not enemies, either. Just two people with a shared past and separate futures. A few months later, I hosted the first backyard cookout I'd had since Dad passed. Nothing big, just a few close friends, some of the guys from the shop, and neighbors. I grilled burgers, played old rock vinyl on the garage speakers, and for the first time in years, laughed without the bitter aftertaste. And yeah, Lee and Miles came too. She stayed mostly near the gate, chatting with the other foster parents I'd invited. Miles ran around like a maniac, chasing the neighbor's dog and stealing extra hot dogs when he thought nobody was looking. Near the end of the evening, as the sky turned that soft orange and the cicadas started humming, Lee walked over and handed me something small. It was a photograph. Faded, creased, and worn. It was Dad, young, maybe early 30s, holding me on his hip, both of us grinning like fools. He had engine grease on his face, and I had one of his wrenches in both hands, chewing on the handle like a teething ring. I found it in a box of old things I didn't throw out, she said softly. Thought you might want it. I took it from her carefully, like it might crumble. I stared at that photo for a long time. Thank you, I said. She smiled. He loved you more than anything in the world, you know. I know, I said. I loved him the same. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but stopped herself. Instead, she just nodded and turned back toward the yard. As I watched her walk away, I finally understood something I hadn't before. Some people break things because they're broken themselves. That doesn't mean you have to pick up all their pieces. But it also doesn't mean you have to carry their weight forever. A week after the cookout, I hung the photo in the garage. Right above the workbench. It felt like the right place. It's not about keeping the past alive, but honoring it while moving forward. Dad's jacket still hangs in the corner. His tools are still lined up on the wall. But now, there's room for new things too. Miles comes by every Saturday. He's working on his own project car now, a beat-up '94 Accord we got for $600 and a handshake. He wants to paint it matte black and put in subwoofers the size of a mini-fridge. I told him it was overkill. He told me I was old. We laugh a lot. Sometimes I catch him staring at the photo of me and Dad. He never says anything. But I see the wheels turning in his head, the kind of longing I recognize all too well. I don't know what kind of man Miles will grow into. But I know one thing, he'll have a chance. A real one. And that might be the best legacy my father ever left me. Not just a house. Not just a shop. But the strength to survive heartbreak. The wisdom to tell the truth. And the courage to stop being angry when it no longer serves you. Because at the end of the day, life isn't about who left, it's about who stayed. And I stayed. I stayed and rebuilt. On my terms. For myself. And for every kid who's ever had to grow up too fast because someone didn't know how to stay. That's the story I live now. And it's one I'm proud to tell.